Okay, great. Thank you very much, Anastasia. It's a pleasure to be here. I also want to thank not only USDA, my home base, but the Innovative Genomics Institute and the Phytobiomes Alliance. And the leadership of Anastasia Bodner, Kelly Eversole, and Melinda Kleigman. I think we don't have a better team of leaders to move into this important and expanding new area. So my talk is on the future, on the overview of the coordinated framework, and I will try to cover briefly the 3 iterations of the coordinated framework that have that started in the 1980s, and primarily because of microbes. At that time, there was a lot of interest not only in Agrobacterium tumefaciens, but Pseudomonas type fungi, and also products such as insulin that were coming on fast and furious because of the use of biotech. I'll try to emphasize some of the principles that the U.S. has not only relied upon, but have elaborated and fleshed out as to how we move forward to use these innovative technologies in a safe and productive manner. And the agencies that are involved in a regulatory website that we have and will be and try to keep updated. So the U.S. Coordinated framework of the products of biotechnology was proposed by the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House and worked through and published in 1986, the first iteration. It describes the federal regulatory system for evaluating the products of biotechnology. And it's based on existing laws that provide a basic network of agency jurisdiction. And that is different than most other countries. And this policy is outlined and made transparently available to anyone that wishes to consult it on the internet and at the agencies themselves. Okay, the 1986 framework established that the existing laws provide the adequate authority to address safety. In other words, the problem that needs to be addressed, as well as the legal framework to address it, and the accumulation of the expertise to evaluate already exists in these different regulatory agencies. That the regulation is based on the end use of the product, that it's the product, not the process, that should be regulated. In other words, the process is neutral. The product is what one needs to evaluate. The regulation should be science-based and conducted on a case-by-case basis. That the broad spectrum of products that could be envisioned can cut across many uses and thus would be regulated by different agencies. And that a lead agency would coordinate as needed if several agencies were involved in the review of a particular organism or product. The National Research Council has been involved since the start, and in 1987 they came out with a very short booklet, but that was fundamentally said that the products of biotechnology, the organisms, do not differ fundamentally from unmodified organisms or from conventional products. That there's no evidence that unique hazards exist, either in the use of rDNA techniques or in the transfer of genes between unrelated organisms. And also that the risks associated with the introduction of rDNA engineered organisms are the same in kind as those associated with the introduction into the environment of unmodified organisms and organisms modified by other genetic techniques. In other words, we weren't creating new species. What we were doing was modifying existing organisms. The 1992 update to the coordinated framework actually was undertaken because we were fast approaching the commercialization of transgenic crops and plants. So we took a look again at the roles and responsibilities of the agencies involved in the regulation of these biotechnology products, and particularly because they were going to be introduced into the environment. And we reaffirmed that federal oversight focuses on the characteristics of the organism and the environment in which it's going to be introduced, and not the process. Again, not the process. And we described a risk-based, scientifically sound basis for the oversight of activities that introduce biotechnology products into the environment. The third iteration came about 30 years later, 25 to 30 years later, after we had developed a lot of expertise, particularly with the plants. But obviously, this began correlating with the CRISPR, and genome editing technology with zinc fingers, TALENs, and CRISPR technologies. And it was initiated by the White House again with a memo asking the agencies and the administration to update the coordinated framework again. And again, the principles were reiterated, and we've shared these principles around the world, and the U.S. regulatory system is highly respected globally because it actually because the science we use as regulators and the documents that we publish are extremely transparent and extremely easy to understand, and our decisions have not been challenged dramatically in the international venue or domestically. I mean, we have lots of questions and input that we receive from all of these folks also. But again, the federal statutes and regulations is based on specific use, are applied and based on specific uses. It's the characteristics of the product, the environment, and the product application that determines its risk or lack thereof. That's important. That the regulatory oversight should be commensurate with risk posed by the product and not on the particular techniques. Again, product versus process. And finally, that a risk-based approach, following a risk-based approach, the regulatory system should distinguish between those products that require oversight and those that do not. And this was a new emphasis based on 30 years of experience, that not everything may need to be regulated, either because it doesn't present a risk or it's been evaluated so many times that it's clear that it doesn't present a risk. So these documents can be found here are the websites to access these documents. And the 2017 update also was accompanied by a national strategy for modernizing the regulatory system for biotech products. This came out a little bit before the updated coordinated framework came, and it was intended to, along with the document that Anastasia mentioned, to look into the future and to help the regulators be prepared for the onslaught and innovations that are coming down the pike. And the regulatory system is a strong part in the acceptance and or rejection of any products that don't meet certain standards. So basically, the statute, which I'll give some examples in a few minutes, that no new laws were passed in the US by Congress or aren't signed into law by the president. However, our regulatory system gives us a lot more flexibility than having to come up with a new law every time the products change. So our regulations implement the law and are adapted and modified to accommodate the new situations or new product types. And the regulators also provide guidance to help folks that are not as comfortable with legal legal terminology understand practically how they can comply with the regulations. So here are some examples of laws that are existing that are used depending on the type of product to implement the as the basis for implementation of regulations. So with the Department of Agriculture, we have the Plant Protection Act and the Animal Health Protection Act, and we have others. I don't have all the Food Safety Inspection Service Acts or the Federal Food, Drug, and the FDA Acts. The Environmental Protection Agency has the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and the Toxic Substances Control Act. And the FDA primarily uses the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act at this point. And again, these laws were in the history of any updated laws were in place long before the advent of GE techniques. So the focus of all of these acts or this legislation is on particular specific protection goals. And these help us focus our regulatory application and risk assessment. So USDA APHIS, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and the Food Safety Inspection Service are in place to look at protection of plant health, safety of veterinary biologics, and safety of meat, poultry, and eggs. These are just examples. And the US EPA looks at the regulation of plant incorporated protections as biopesticides, the safe use of new pesticides, and the safe use of chemicals, and which a PIP, of plant incorporated protectant, is a kind of new pesticide. And then the US Food and Drug Administration looks at this, focuses on the safety of food additives, and feed, and the safety of veterinary and human drugs and human biologics. So as an outcome of the last iteration of the coordinated framework in 2019, an executive order came out of the White House, Executive Order 13A74, to help to provide some impetus for the regulatory agencies to modernize their regulatory systems for ag biotech products. And again, the emphasis was that the regulatory approaches should be proportional to the risks such products pose, and that decisions should be based on scientific and technical evidence, and that regulatory determinations should be based on the risks associated with the product and its intended use. This just is a nice example of how the process that regulations are constantly undertaking to update and keep pace in various aspects of both implementation and development of updating of regulations to keep pace with advancing technology. We need clear objectives, the update on the science and the development and revision of regulations, and clarification of implementation. And the purpose, obviously, is to continually not only meet legal and policy objectives, but to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the regulatory system based on the knowledge and preparation for new products. And this is an example. I pulled parts of this out of the actual 2017 coordinated framework document. So let's say you have your use as a pesticide and your source organism is a genetically engineered microbe. And this could be reviewed by up to 6 agencies, and perhaps even more. But for instance, the EPA might be looking at the microbial product in the Office of Pesticide programs, and also could be looking at the actual use of the microbe itself as a pesticide in the Office of Pollution Protection and Pesticide Protection and Toxicity. Sorry, Mike. And then FDA, if it's going to be used as, if it's going to be incorporated, the genetics is going to be incorporated into a food. It could be reviewed by the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, as well as if it's going to also be incorporated into animal feed, Center for Veterinary Medicine. And if the organism is related to or is a plant pest, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service might also review this. So it's important to understand the regulatory system in order to, one, to save yourself some time, and also to make sure that the regulatory agencies know what you're thinking about and can provide you input as to who and whether you're going to be regulated, excuse me. But also allow us time to prepare for whatever kind of products you're thinking of, so that we have a unified website for biotechnology regulation, and you can see what the website looks like, and you can see what the menu, which is the coordinated framework, links to various agency websites, frequently asked questions, and contact us. And that's the contact us page is very important. I've put the link there, and you can contact us, and it will go to all the agencies that are involved, and we can set up talks with you, or if you just have a specific question, we can respond to that specifically. But it behooves you to work with us early and often as you're developing new products. So thank you very much. I hope that's somewhat helpful and sets a good context for the discussions that are going to occur over the next 2 days.